Okay, so I'm going to quickly go over a few of the Pokemon that have been discussed on the server and amongst even the council, just about kind of where they stand in the metagame and just, how people feel about them. Because there's quite a lot, as I've discussed in the video previously, there's quite a lot of Pokemon that are quite threatening offensively to the point where it's extremely difficult to check them. The tier has numerous offensive threats, but it's quite short on actual defensive checks. You seem to be pretty much limited to stuff like Milotic, Regice, Pokemon like that, maybe Registeel and Regirock at times as well, which are less offensive presence than Regice, but kind of those Pokemon introduce their own flaws as well. Some people experiment with things like Alcremie and sometimes use Chestnut defensively. Those Pokemon are actually quite weak to Dugtrio, and I'm going to be discussing what I think about Dugtrio in a minute, but the presence of Dugtrio in general, Dugtrio Alola, really makes it hard to properly check a lot of other Pokemon. Just because Dugtrio can trap a lot of the best walls in the game and not even necessarily one-hit KO them, but after a little bit of chip, which you can achieve with, as I mentioned earlier, the numerous offensive threats that exist in the tier, Dugtrio can kind of just come in and clean them up and pave the way for more offensive threats to win the game. So I'll discuss Dugtrio a bit more deeply in a second, but the Pokemon I want to focus on first is probably Gyarados. A lot of people have been, using Gyarados, talking about Gyarados, planning their teams around Gyarados, both with on it and, against it. And, in my opinion, I think it is the #1 Pokemon in the tier at the moment. It's something you just have to prepare for in the team builder. Its usual sets are usually running not Skydrop, but Dragon Dance, Earthquake, Hidden Power Flying, and a filler move of various different things I've seen Taunt, which is pretty great at preventing status from ending it. I've seen Substitute, which blocks status completely and means that you can set up more than one Dragon Dance, which can easily win you the game. You could also run things like Double Edge to just hit more neutral targets harder. And you can even run Rest as well with some defensive EVs, and this will allow you to check a lot of more bulky Pokemon, like potentially like Registeel, or even like a I can't even think at the moment. Even something like a Grumpig, which would otherwise threaten you, or Grumpig without Thunderbolt, which would otherwise threaten you out by Calm Minding in front of you. But the typical sets, I suppose I should say, are going to be running Dragon Dance, Earthquake, Hidden Power Flying, and probably Taunt or Substitute. Sometimes you can run Hidden Power Rock or Hidden Power Ghost instead of Hidden Power Flying. It does diminish Gyarados' offensive potential quite a lot, but Rock specifically allows you to win the Gyarados mirror. You'll be dealing enough damage to 2-hit KO, I think even without a Dragon Dance. And Hidden Power Ghost means that after a Dragon Dance you can 1-hit KO Miss Magus and other Psychic types as well, I believe. Like, what Psychic types are we seeing at the moment? Mainly Miss Magus, to be honest, but also probably things like Espeon and Alakazam will be 1-hit KO by Hidden Power Ghost, I imagine. But Flying is pretty standard. It's Gyarados' strongest attack other than Double Edge, which has recoil. So I think just kind of going with the true and tested Hidden Power Flying is usually fine. The issue that stems from Gyarados is that once it gets to +2 attack, it's almost impossible to deal with. It can outspeed everything in the entire tier at +2 because it will usually run enough speed to kind of hover around the 250 mark. So obviously once it gets to +2, it's even if it's down here, it's going to be over 400 speed, which outspeeds even speed invested Electrode, which you can obviously run to try and tackle this thing. Although once the Gyarados is at +2 anyway, it's going to be faster than a very heavily speed invested Electrode, and then it's going to KO it probably immediately with a Hidden Power Flying at +2 as well. So I think that's where a lot of the worries and a lot of the kind of drive towards should we remove this from the tier are coming from. Where do I stand on Gyarados? I'm still not convinced it should be banned, and the reason why is because it's very difficult to get to +2 with Gyarados. There are a lot of ways you can kind of creatively build your team around not insta-losing to Gyarados. You can add a max speed Jolteon, for example, which will outspeed all but Jolly Gyarados, and I don't think I've actually seen a Jolly Gyarados yet in the tournament. So that's something to think about, but Jolteon with a timid nature and max speed will reach 394, which outspeeds max speed Adamant Gyarados. So that's worth noting. As well as obviously Electrode, which I mentioned earlier, or Electrode Hisui I should say, which is not weak to Hidden Power Flying, and it's not weak to Earthquake either, which means you can actually take a hit at +1 and KO it back with Thunderbolt. And obviously Electrode Hisui is quite naturally fast as well, so with a timid nature and some investment, you're reaching around the same speed benchmark as Jolteon. Obviously, if you're not going to invest in any special attack, your Thunderbolts are not going to KO, but you can run things like Thunder Wave to cripple it. And these are kind of the offensive options that you have for checking Gyarados, and you do have to make some pretty ballsy plays and switch it in immediately on the Gyarados Dragon Dancing, but I think these are completely fine plays to make once in the game, and then you kind of are in a position where you can stop the Gyarados from coming in freely at that point, I feel, and it's they're quite good for, you know, kind of staving Gyarados from coming into the field freely whenever it likes. But the more defensive options, other than kind of Electrode and Jolteon, there are other electric types that fit the bill as well, actually. One specifically I've noticed is Minun, which is an electric type with Levitate. So you can come in on a +1, and you're immune to Earthquake, and you resist in Power Flying. And obviously Minun learns Thunderbolt as well, so if you are running max special attack with Thunderbolt, that should KO most but the bulkiest of Gyarados. And bulkier Gyarados variants are not going to outspeed you at +1 anyway, so you can easily deal damage straight back to them. But anyway, onto the more defensive checks. What do we have? We have things like Regirock, which work as soft checks. Just rock types in general seem to be quite good with high defense. So we've got Regirock with its base 200 defense and clear body, obviously so it doesn't get intimidated, although I don't imagine you're going to see Gyarados switching in much unless it's a kind of desperation attempt. You've got Solrock and Lunatone, which work quite well against the Hidden Power Flying variants, with, you know, the rock typing and Levitate. Take hits and deal Rock Slide back. Specifically Solrock with its higher attack stat is a little bit better for that. And there's also Wigglytuff, which is a much more defensively suited Pokemon in general, but with Fur Coat is taking no damage from Gyarados, and can threaten back with, you know, with Seismic Toss or even Thunderbolt if it's running that. It can status it with Thunder Wave or Toxic. Wigglytuff is a pretty fantastic check to Gyarados, and really doesn't take much damage from even +2 or +3 Hidden Power Flying. It can kind of Wish Tech and just slowly chip it down. The only problem with Wigglytuff is if it's not running a Thunderbolt set and it's only running Seismic Toss, it does really struggle against the Taunt variants of Gyarados, as those will just set up in its face and get to +6, while Wigglytuff has to really try and kind of, you know, win the war of attrition by Seismic Tossing it constantly. Which is possible if the Gyarados isn't holding leftovers. It isn't actually that difficult, but a leftovers Gyarados with Taunt is going to really make Wigglytuff's life pretty difficult. And in the same vein, the other check that I'm aware of for this is Dugong. So if we look at Dugong, another Fur Coat user, in essence resists both Earthquake and Hidden Power Flying. Has similar stats in practice to Wigglytuff with the lower HP and the higher defense. And this kind of threatens, at least by using moves like Encore and Ice Beam to handle a lot of pressure. Obviously Ice Beam threatens a freeze, and Encore can potentially lock it into a Dragon Dance loop, which obviously allows other things into it to actually attack it and deal some damage. But those are kind of the most obvious defensive checks. There are probably other things here in the team builder that I haven't properly glanced over, but those are the main ones. And admittedly, it is pretty limited. You can probably tell just from those Pokemon that you're either trying to out offense Gyarados, outspeed it when it gets to +1, or you're trying to, use the most defensive Pokemon that exists in the game that are very passive and don't really offer much pressure themselves, like Wigglytuff, and I suppose Dugong can offer some pressure, but Dugong obviously has flaws of its own on the special side, whereas Wigglytuff is very passive. There are other checks that you can use as soft in the game, including your own Gyarados to come in and intimidate it and get the attack drop. Gyarados mirrors are something that are honestly relatively common. You don't see them every game, but seeing as Gyarados is its own best check at the moment, I don't see why you wouldn't see that in the first place, and I do consider it the #1 Pokemon, as I've mentioned. I like Regice with a bit of HP investment as a soft check. You can come in and threaten it with both either Thunderbolt or Thunder Wave. As such, the only difficult part of Regice, and a lot of Pokemon in general to be honest, is Gyarados' item versatility is very, very scary. It can run Leftovers, or it can run a Lumberry, or it can even run a Wackenberry, which I ended up facing in my first week of the tournament, and it was unfortunately a bit of a situation where it was a coin flip in terms of do I click Thunderbolt or Thunder Wave here. I think I was aware that my opponent didn't actually have Leftovers, and it was very difficult for me to know whether they were going to be carrying either of those items, because obviously it's not really concealed until you click one of the moves. Thunderbolt one-hit KOs, and Thunder Wave obviously ends the Dragon Dance sweep from the Gyarados, and I ended up going for Thunderbolt and hitting a Wackenberry and getting swept, if I remember correctly. So you kind of hit those situations with Gyarados, and they're not nice, and it's kind of just part of the metagame in general with having damage resist berries, and Gyarados really benefits from that, unfortunately. So that's really all I have to say about Gyarados for now. I don't necessarily think it needs to be banned immediately, but I can definitely see why it is very centralizing and very strong and very inconvenient to team building to handle, but I don't think it's unhealthy, and I don't necessarily think it's broken at the moment. My opinion might change over the course of time, and I really think it's very strong, but I don't think it's quite verging into broken territory, and I quite like its defensive pivoting ability in terms of not taking spikes damage and having Intimidate, and I think those are quite useful things considering how offensive the tier is at the moment. So I'm not inclined to vote banning on it at the moment. And if we do hold a poll anytime soon, I do believe I would be voting do not ban on Gyarados. So that's really I have to say about Gyarados for now. I'll move on to Dugtrio now, which is another Pokemon which is really benefiting from this tier in terms of the offensive potential of everything, just how Gyarados does. It's in the nicest way possible. This Pokemon's completely ridiculous. With Arena Trap and Max Speed, it pretty much eliminates most of the threats, most of the defensive checks that you'll be seeing to Pokemon. It eliminates a lot of offensive threats as well, honestly, but we'll focus on the defensive ones first. The set I've been running on this is just a max attack, max speed set with Earthquake, Rock Slide, Hidden Power Steel, and Aerial Ace. And the idea is, we pop a 4th EV into whatever, it doesn't really matter, probably Spadef. And the idea is you trap an absolute ton of stuff. Anything with Chip will die to Dugtrio as long as it isn't Levitate. Anything that's kind of walling the likes of Blaziken or Mismagius, Articuno Galar, Slowbro, any Calm-Minded to be honest. You just pair it with Dugtrio lower and it will just clear them completely out of the way for you. This Pokemon's pretty detrimental to the tier's health at the moment. It means that trying to check things defensively, usually you want to pack a couple of Levitators or Flyers to do so, because otherwise Dugtrio Alola is threatening revenge killing them. And then you face a very similar Pokemon with a very similar stat spread or move pool, and your defensive check is completely gone for them. A good example of this might be if you're using, for example, let's say Articuno Galar and a Miss Magus on the same team, both of those would benefit from something like a... Just trying to think of a generic dark type that would be able to check both of those. Let me have a look through the list. So we'll take, for example, Crawdaunt, which isn't even weak to any of Dugtrio's moves, but Crawdaunt with Crunch is obviously quite problematic for both of those Pokemon, specifically Articuno, maybe not so much Miss Magus and Thunderbolt, but you can easily trap a Crawdaunt probably at about 50-60% health and just Earthquake it and it will die. And suddenly your Articuno Galar or whatever you're running is looking a lot better for the game. This is the case for a lot of Pokemon, by the way, so even things like Grumpig, which would traditionally check them, or Slowbro Galar, which is a poison type and weak to Earthquake, and quite favourable against the likes of Miss Magus and Articuno because it can win the Calm Mind War with its typing. It's you just slap a Dugtrio on there and it removes them. It's so powerful at what it does, and it only has one job, and that's to kind of make way for the likes of other broken Pokemon, to be honest. And even without those broken Pokemon that also exist in the tier, I think Dugtrio is still too strong. It just accomplishes too much for teams that have it on them. I don't really have much more to say about this, to be honest. It's just not good for the tier. The versatility of this tier is, you know, kind of down the well because of this thing's existence, and it really should be banned. Okay, I'm going to move on to Blaziken now. A very, very strong Pokemon. Can run a plethora of moves. I like running either Fire Blast or Flamethrower. Usually Flamethrower just because it doesn't miss. I like running probably Brick Break here. Again, so it doesn't miss, but you can run Sky Uppercut. And then you can run something like Thunder Punch or Hidden Power Ice as the last slots. Thunder Punch is obviously for Gyarados, which you outspeed at +0. The Adamant variant anyway, if you run a plus speed nature, which you should be on the Blaziken. It's got good mixed attacking stats. But you can run in the last slot something like Hidden Power Ice, if I can find it. As such, you can run Overheat in the last slot just to get some extra damage onto certain defensive checks, like maybe like a Moltres Galar or something. You can run... What else can you run? You can even run like Toxic. And even Bulk Up if you're feeling brave or something like that. But this isn't all that Blaziken can do. In Game 3 of my UU match this week, I ran a Ensalak reversal set, which I will show you. So we had a Salak Berry, and we had Reversal on Jure, Thunder Punch, and Fire Blast as the last moves. And we were running enough speed to... It was a naive nature, I'm pretty sure. And we were running about this much speed so that we can outspeed Jolteon after the Salak Berry activates. We ran max attack so that Reversal does as much damage as it can, and the rest just goes into special attack. So, you know, the versatility of a Blaziken either running coverage or running this set is really scary, and it doesn't really need much more coverage than Fire Blast, Thunder Punch, and Reversal at the moment, and that's kind of where its strength comes from, in that the Unjure set is honestly just as strong in its own regard. It obviously loses to a priority move, which, because the metagame's quite young, a lot of people do carry random kind of priority move coverage, which loosens the strength of this set, but it's still very potent as an endgame tactic, just for sweeping, because there isn't really anything that can handle the strength of this thing. Its coverage is fantastic, and its versatility is pretty hard to switch into. I believe the only decent check in the entire tier for Blaziken is Milotic. Milotic, as far as we can tell, only seems to really fit on a specific kind of bulky team, which means that to remove Blaziken, you either have to run Dugtrio or you have to get yourself into a position where it can't get in the first place. Pretty similar to Gyarados, actually, in its own regard. And I would be quite happy to see this thing gone, just because it's almost impossible for most teams to switch into. Unlike Gyarados, which at least has some defensive checks and even some offensive ones. Blaziken just doesn't have anything. Nearly everything gets 2-hit KO'd by it, and the things that don't are only ran on a certain team style, as I've said. So I really think this tier would benefit from no more Blaziken. So there's not much more to say about Blaziken. We'll move on to Articuno Galar. My opinion's kind of wavered a little bit on this Pokemon. We haven't seen it as much as I'd expected, and it hasn't performed as well as I'd expected. The problem with Articuno Galar is its base stats are absolutely stacked. It's got good bulk, it's got good speed, it's got great special attack, and it's got a decent move pool. It's not fantastic, but it gets the classic Calm Mind and Recover, which makes it nigh unkillable for a lot of things. It's also Spike immune and has the ability Pressure, which means it can stall things. It also has Heal Bell, a hidden power of your choice, or Psychic. And if you want to go full in on the stall, which I haven't really worked out a spread for yet, I could probably hit up the damage calc at some point when I have a bit more time. But you can run the move Extrasensory, which has 48 PP and does similar damage to Psychic. And you can just PP stall with Pressure and win games that way with a defensive set, I'd imagine. It's not really been explored yet, but, you know, Extrasensory Recover, Heal Bell, and not even necessarily Calm Mind, but Calm Mind's, you know, there's nothing wrong with, as long as you remove the dark types. You can run this and it'll be fine. It even gets moves like Roar, Hypnosis. If you're feeling greedy, you could run that on this pretty feasibly because it's got enough bulk for it. And as far as I can tell, this Pokemon's just extremely versatile. It's extremely bulky, it's extremely fast. It can basically do anything from what I can tell. It's got great stat spread, Spike immunity. But all those things said, I feel like we've struggled a little bit with figuring out how to use this thing. It wants to do so much, but it can't do all of it at the same time. And it's struggling to shine its head above the likes of the other Calm Minders, such as Miss Magus, for example, which often runs Thunderbolt and is faster, so Articuno kind of lives in its shadow a little bit. There's also Alakazam, which has seen drop off in usage, I think, recently. It isn't as common as it was in the early days. But obviously an Alakazam with Ice Punch or Thunder Punch is really threatening to kill this thing as well, quite easily. And I think with those things' existence, Articuno's looked a lot worse than it actually is. But I think once we start seeing things settle, once we start seeing a lot more Miss Magus counterplay, a lot more kind of team building with, you know, the random HP Ghost for handling things like Miss Magus, I think Articuno's going to suffer. But I think it will also shine as well, because unlike Miss Magus, it has reliable recovery and it offers a ton of team support. I don't know if I want to ban this thing at the moment. There's still a few more games to be played this week as far as I'm aware, but as things stand, I probably will abstain for voting on it this week. If we held a vote, I'm not too sure if we're holding a vote this week, but if we do, I'm going to abstain probably. I wonder if this Pokemon is actually fine for the tier, just based on what I've seen. It seems to find it very difficult to switch in despite its, you know, its strengths. And like I said before, it lives in the shadow of the other Calm Minders a little bit, especially Miss Magus. So with a little bit more testing, I guess maybe we'll find out what this thing wants to do. But for now, I'm not too sure banning it is the right move. But it is very strong, and the toolset it has looks completely ridiculous. So if it ends up getting banned, I'm not going to miss it. And I've obviously, you know, expressed my opinions on banning this thing in the past, so I don't really mind what happens. But I'd abstain just for the sake of giving this thing a fair chance. I think its usage isn't as high as I'd expected, so we'll see what happens with it anyway, whether it gets banned or not. Okay, so Miss Magus. This thing is a fan favourite. People are spamming the hell out of this thing. I see it in everyone's games. I've never used it actually personally, because I don't think it's that good. It has great traits, don't get me wrong. It's got Ghost typing, 2 immunities, plus Levitates, 3 immunities. It's very fast with a base 105 speed, I believe, meaning it can outrun nearly all of the metagame with a timid nature. And its move pool is pretty stacked. It's got a lot of threatening things. Obviously it's got Calm Mind, as I've been mentioning. It's got Psychic and Thunderbolt. It's got Destiny Bonds if you want to try and take something down with you as you're dying. It's got other moves as well. I believe it gets Hypnosis and Pain Split as well for trading damage with something. Gets Mean Look and Perish Song if you want to forego the Calm Mind route and try and trap something, which is probably quite difficult to build around, but might have potential. And there are other options as well that I believe it can run. It also gets things like Sucker Punch and Thief and Thunder Wave, so it can spread status with those and steal items. Sucker Punch in particular is interesting as it does mean that you can threaten something like Alakazam or just faster Calm Minders, or faster Pokemon in general, to be honest, even like, I don't know, like a Sceptile trying to trap you. So those are options as well. There's a move that I've missed as well. Hidden Power Dark for the Psychic type mirror you could run as well. It doesn't lower any of your EVs. Hidden Power Dark is the default. Hidden Power for a maxed out EV Pokemon, I believe. So that's also an option as well. All that said, it's got a lot going for it. It just doesn't deal enough damage, and it takes a long time to get going. It really needs to get to +2 or +3 special to really start pressuring and stuff. And that's because it doesn't have any stab attacks. It's a ghost type, which means, you know, it doesn't have a special attacking ghost type move because it's Gen 3. And it's effectively a lot weaker because of that. It's still very fast and got good special defense, which means it can take a decent hit when it wants to, but it takes too long to get going, really. I don't know if I mentioned Taunt and Substitute as well. A lot of people have been running those in tandem to... not Snatch, sorry, Taunts. But they've been running moves like those in tandem with Calm Mind to stop things from statusing it, from throwing a Toxic at it, or Thunder Wave, or anything like that, really. And it's quite a good idea, because Mismagius is really fast, and it can force a lot of Calm Minds, but like people are starting to get used to this thing, and packing, hopefully, at least some kind of counterplay for it. I've been running a especially defensive Hidden Power Ghost variant of Hariyama to deal with it. I think it one-hit KOs all but, you know, max HP invested Mismagius. And if they're going max HP, they're not going to do much damage with Psychic to you, so you can easily trade and whittle it down pretty quickly with something like a Hariyama. But there are other things that just completely stonewall this Pokemon. For example, Steelix, even though it's a physical wall, well, I suppose it's a bit more of a mixed wall in this tier because it was typing, but Steelix completely stonewalls nearly all sets but bar HP Fire, which I haven't actually seen yet. So it really struggles to get past certain Pokemon. Steelix has been shown to be pretty decent in this tier as well, so it's on a lot of teams. As for that, there are Pokemon like Grumpig which check it if it doesn't run HP Dark. Slowbro Galar I've been using as a tech to come in and win the Calm Mind War because Slowbro Galar gets reliable recovery. Gets Slack Off. Slowking Galar can probably do a similar trick. Although I chose Slowbro Galar just because, in my game today, just because it has knockoff. But both of those Pokemon check it pretty well. There's things like Jolteon, which can come in and threaten a Thunder Wave, even though it might be running Taunt, just because the Jolteon's faster. It can come in pretty safely on the Thunderbolt and not take any damage as well. And just Pokemon like this are causing a lot of problems for this, I think, and it's never really appealed to me as much as it appeals to other people. I mean, the thing is with Mismagius is that a lot of its checks are actually dealt with Dugtrio. It pairs fantastically with that Pokemon. Even with the Mean Look set as a kind of an offset, as opposed to the Calm Mind one, it pairs pretty well, because you can keep up the trap. But I just don't value it that much as an option. It's got a lot of tools, and I do want to explore it at some point, but there's a lot of other things that I'd rather explore in the first place, and I think as you can tell by the kind of tone in my language maybe, that I'm not really keen to ban this thing, so if it does get a vote put on it, I'm voting do not ban. It's a good Pokemon. It's maybe a top 10, top 15 Pokemon potentially. I feel like it might fall off over time just because it has damage problems coming out of its backside and it's not very bulky, it's quite frail, with a base of 60 HP. And yeah, I would not ban. I would vote not to ban this Pokemon. Next Pokemon is Slacking, or Slaking, however you want to pronounce it. I believe the official pronunciation is Slaking, but I've always called it Slacking. Slacking is the most annoying son of a bitch in this tier. It's not even that good. It's so abusable and exploitable. You just need some form of defensive protection, and maybe literally in the form of Protect. You could run Endure, or you could run, you know, any Pokemon that's immune to its attacks, as it will probably be running some mixture of Return, Earthquake, Shadow Ball, you know, Hyper Beam some people are running, you know, really doubling down on the fact that this thing is exploitable. But you can also run even special attacks as coverage, maybe like Fire Blast or something, to hit a surprise Morale trying to come in on you. Or, you know, like a Levitator if they're expecting an Earthquake. You can get some good results with that because it does have base 95 special attack, which is massive for a Pokemon that's physically inclined. There are other moves here as well that I was thinking of. I can't remember what they were. Maybe like Brick Break or something is quite good. But this Pokemon, you know, it's so annoying because it just doesn't die. It's very bulky. It's got base 150 HP, 100 defense, 65 Spadef. It's like a physically bulky Snorlax, but with massive downsides. It's pretty fast as well for this tier. Excuse me, it's base 100, and that's outspeeding, you know, a lot of things on a lot of teams, even with an Adamant Nature if you're running that. It's a Pokemon with huge upsides and huge downsides. On the other side of the coin, right? Because with Truant, you KO something, you nab a KO, and then you're kind of forced to just sit there or switch out and do nothing while your opponent, you know, if they've got a Gyarados, they can Dragon Dance, and if your only answer to it is the aforementioned Thunder Wave, you know, Thunderbolt, Regice, then if you guess wrong and it gets a second Dragon Dance, you might just lose the entire game. You're kind of opening these little avenues for people to exploit, especially if they have a faster Pokemon as well. And they get 2 free turns out of this thing, then, you know, they're kind of laughing their way to the bank, you know, exploiting it. But I still think it should be banned, just because it's the most unfun thing to play against in the world. It's just a lot of people just slap Choice Band on it because obviously you're not going to be clicking multiple moves, and they try to land damage on something, try to wall break something, and a lot of the Pokemon in this tier, because the power level is lower, aren't able to actually wall break this thing. They're not able to exploit it fully. They exploit it pretty heavily just because Truant's such a bad ability, but the amount of exploitation that can actually be done when you're, you know, you're looking at a Mismagius being a top 10 Pokemon and its special attack's 105 and it has no stab, you know, you're kind of limited a little bit in terms of exploitation. Obviously, you know, some Pokemon don't even have that strong attacks, like Gyarados, his strongest attack is base 70. So you're kind of gonna struggle to wear this thing down. There's no Permasand because there's no Tyranitar. It does take Spikes damage, but it doesn't really care because its health doesn't matter as long as it's alive. And it forces really choreographed gameplay, and it's just uninteresting, almost uncompetitive to be honest, rather than broken. But I'd vote ban in a heartbeat, just because I think seeing this thing, you know, forcing people to run really bulky defensive checks like Regirock, or at least consider something like Wigglytuff, just to have an option that doesn't instantly lose a Pokemon to this thing so you can play around it, is, you know, it's not nice. And I think it would be a lot nicer for this here not to have Slacking hanging around. Okay, so we're getting kind of to the end of this now. I think these are the last 3. Zapdos, Galar, Sizzle, Moltres, Galar. Zapdos, Galar. Okay, let me just gather my train of thought. I've been talking for half an hour. Obviously I have a lot of thoughts on these, don't I? It's only got one set as far as I can tell, and that is a Choice Band set with Drill Peck, Brick Break, Hidden Power Rock. If I can see Hidden Power Rock, I'm looking way too low. And kind of a filler move of whatever you like, so you could run Baton Pass just to keep momentum. It's really nice actually to run Baton Pass on a Choice Band set. You could run Low Kick. I'm sure it has some targets it hits, you know, for mega damage. You can run Roar if you're feeling really greedy, you know, Choice Band Roar. Totally see that as a valid option, to be honest. I don't think it's amazing, but definitely will do something. Maybe even Toxic, because I don't see many Steel types staying in on the Zapdos. And you basically just click buttons until something dies. It's very, very good at it. Extremely good at it. I've seen Drill Peck doing like 50% to a Weezing. It's ridiculous. You know, like the closest thing to a decent check in terms of a defensive Pokemon with a huge defense stat and then a pretty good HP stat, and it taking nearly 50% from Drill Peck is pretty disgusting. It's very hard to check this in UU. There aren't enough defensive options outside of what we've mentioned before. Wigglytuff takes a decent amount of damage from it, I'd imagine, because it's taking double damage from the Brick Break, which means it's not really a check. There are kind of other options. I mean, if you switch in on the wrong move, you just kind of lose a Pokemon, and that's not fun. And then you have Hidden Power Rock for hitting certain flying types, like I was about to say Gliscor, but I suppose Gligar people are going to be using that, or even Gyarados, which is currently the best check for it at the moment. You can predict the Gyarados come in, just go for HP Rock and 2-hit KO it quite easily, because you do outspeed even with Adamant. I think this thing's probably worth banning. I'd vote to ban it. Just after testing it in a few games, it deals way too much damage, and it's spike immune, and it's very fast, and it's very, very difficult to check. The checks that it has, compared to the likes of Slaking and Gyarados and Sizzle, which we'll be getting to, they're not the same. Well, they are the same, but they're not. This thing will help wall break them so that your Gyarados or whatever can easily sweep at the end. And even if you're not going for that, like, because it's so fast, it can easily just sweep on its own if you remove a lot of the faster Pokemon. I'd be happy to see this thing gone, to be honest. I'm not really too impressed by Zapdos in the tier. It's too strong, quite simply. Maybe there's other sets that it can run as well, but I don't see the point when it can just run this and deal absolutely tons of damage to everything. Okay, so we're going to go into Scizor. The thorn in the backside of any Hoenn Gaiden UU player, because this thing is so difficult to kill. It's got an amazing Bug Steel typing, which means it's poison immune, and it learns, most importantly, reliable recovery in the move Morning Sun, because there is no permanent weather in this tier. So you heal 50% constantly, and your EVs can do whatever. There's probably some optimal thing, but you can run completely max bulk if you want to be honest, because the whole point in Scizor is you run Morning Sun and Knockoff, and you just whistle everything down with this and this, and Lunge. Maybe you keep Baton Pass for keeping momentum. You can run some attack so you can deal a bit more damage, run some speed so that you're not falling behind too much. You can outspeed some base 70s with no investments, and base 80s even if you want to go that high. And yeah, you just hang around very, very, very efficiently. I've played a game today where I was using Scizor on my team so that I could enable the Ensalic Blaziken, and this thing was staring at the face of a friggin' Regirock, just constantly healing in its face, taking rock slides repeatedly with not that much HP and not that much defensive investment. I think I went nearly max HP and that was it, and the rest was in speed and a little bit in attack. But it could just take those hits like a beast, and it is dealing with, with business it shouldn't be, quite honestly. That's not really something I like to see, when it can just knock off the Regirock and deal 20% with Lunge and just slowly whistle it down while it's constantly healing off the rock slides, dealing 40%. Obviously the item you want to run is Leftovers as well, which kind of facilitates your healing. This thing, I believe, should probably also be banned. Quite a ban-happy guy, really. I think we really need to kind of lower the amount of offensive options in this tier. And this Pokemon, while it's defensive, it's defensive, but also it's amazingly offensive, because I'm talking about the defensive set here, but you can very easily run, Swords Dance, Lunge. I don't know why I went to Knockoff. You could easily run Swords Dance, Lunge, Acrobatics potentially, and Hidden Power Fighting or Hidden Power Rock. And, off of a base 130 attack stat, that's going to be doing tons of damage. It is quite slow, but it's very hard to hit with a super effective attack. And it will live a stray HP fire if you EV it correctly. The general power level of this tier is a little bit lower than OU, and a stray HP fire is not going to scare this thing too much with 70-80 bulk. We should ban it, to be honest. It's very similar to Cleavor in OU in terms of how much it can, offensively threaten stuff. But it also has a defensive set, and then it also has an Ensalic reversal set, similar to how Blaziken does, and I've not even explored that, but that set is probably absolutely fantastic. Just because of its typing and the music can run. You know, it can kind of switch up the playstyle whenever it likes. The lunge stuff in the early game for the attacks drops, and then it can end Salak when it's feeling, you know, a little bit wasted and just attempt to sweep potentially even. I think it should be banned. It's too versatile. The defensive sets are very hard to break in the offensive sets, while I haven't seen them as much. You know, if you're predicting a defensive set and you get swept by an offensive set, that's potentially a thing that could very easily happen just based on its stats. So, for Moltres Galar, this thing has taken an absolute tanking recently in terms of its performance. I think its win rate currently in the tournament is about 30%. And that's quite simply because, with Miss Magus being everywhere, running Thunderbolt, this thing can't reliably Pursuit Trap it. It just gets 2-hit KO'd by Thunderbolt. You really want to run this thing to be hitting the likes of Grumpig and maybe Articuno Galar, which doesn't really run HP Electric or an attack that can actually properly handle it. Articuno Galar kind of just is able to switch out of Pursuit anyway, it doesn't take enough, and it recovers back later. But Moltres is really struggling to make an impact because it doesn't have a very flashy move pool. It's basically limited to Fire Wrath and a hidden power of your choice. I'm not too keen on Pursuit because this thing is just asking for things to trade hits with it constantly, and it doesn't really force anything out because its move pool is so shallow. You could run things like Toxic and Taunt, which is probably the best way to go. It gets Sucker Punch as well for things like Alakazam, which is quite nice, but it's not a very good move in general because it takes up a whole move slot, and then you're not able to run a hidden power, or you're not able to run Toxic or Taunt, and you know, things get to Carmine for free or sub or whatever they're trying to do, really, right? And it's trying to juggle all of these tasks at once, as well as pursuing if you're running that set, and it just can't do them. Not effectively enough. Oh, excuse me. And there is one set which I have brought at least once, maybe twice, with Memento, and I've never had a chance to use it because it doesn't really invite in Pokemon that, you know, are too crippled by Memento. It sometimes just gets out-defensed by other toxic Protect spammers, and if you're going to Memento on them, it's kind of just a waste of time. So I've been in positions where you trade hits with the Psychic type or the Miss Magus, you're left on like 15%, and you're facing like something silly, like a Tox Tech Steelix, and you're like, it's got clear body potentially, and you're not going to Memento that, so you're kind of in situations then where you don't want to click it, and it might be good. Maybe you just need to kind of build more intelligently around it, you know, self-dig at my own teams there. But that could be a good set. Couldn't say anything wrong with that. It also gets Roar as well, which is nice if you have Spike Stamp. I think it pairs particularly well with Spikes with the Fiery Wrath flinches, so I quite like that. It's just not a very good Pokemon though. It's not amazing. I mean, it's not bad, or it's not terrible. It's pretty decent. You know, it's strong. It has good defenses, good stats. Shallow move pool though, sadly, and this thing is kind of out of the radar of most people, I think, at this point. We don't really seem to want to ban it anymore, which is quite good. I thought it offered some defensive utility in the tier, and I was very, very passionate about not letting us ban it too quickly. Turns out that its defensive utility is actually pretty terrible as well, and it seems to just be quite a middling Pokemon, not too good. We'll see what happens with it anyway. Maybe there's like a sweet spot with the EVs or the moveset, which once people have kind of settled the tier a little bit more and found out what's really good, this thing can kind of jump into the action and start actually handling them. But for now, I don't think it's good enough to warrant a ban at all. It's not even close. Okay, so Surfetched. I've not explored it. I've not really seen it. I've tested it a couple of times and I wasn't too impressed. But I think this is kind of out of the radar again of most people at this point. I think it's outclassed by Hariyama with Thick Fat, and even with Guts if you want to run for a status absorber of the likes of Toxic or Burns or whatever. Surfetched is obviously status vulnerable. It does get inner focus, which means you can't be flinched or intimidated, but I think the trade-off of that for having Thick Fat or Guts is not worth, in my opinion. You do get some other cool tools like Swords Dance and Quick Attack, and people have messed around with the Stick as a set to deal critical hits. I think it goes up to a 33% chance, maybe 25% chance for your attacks if you hold a stick. It's not fantastic, but it's an option. It doesn't mean you're gonna get worn down pretty quickly because this thing can't recover. But I'm not that impressed by it. It's living in a land of many fighting types. It doesn't have anything specifically that makes it shine other than quick attack and sword stance. It's not really something that should be banned, I don't think. It's kind of where I stand on Surf Edge, but yeah, this has been fun to talk about these actually, get my thoughts out there. I've been going on for 45 minutes in this section, goodness. But yeah, nice to talk about these, and maybe I'll do another video about this soon and try and shorten it down a little bit because this one's gone quite long, but yeah, peace.